Picture this: 3,000 warships, 12 alien governments on the edge of open war. A galaxy-wide manhunt that had been running for 6 days straight. And the answer, the entire answer to every single crisis, was too small. Aliens wrapped in a human's old blanket, softly snoring on a second-hand couch on Deck 7 of a civilian cargo station. Nobody checked there first. Nobody checked there at all until Sergeant Marcus Webb had to explain to an admiral, a real live HFT insect admiral with 6 arms and a crown, why the missing princesses of the Veth Imperium were napping peacefully in his quarters next to an empty mug of hot cocoa and a half-finished paperback novel. This is that story. Before we get into it, here's what you're going to find out today. First, why the disappearance of 2 alien teenagers nearly started the biggest interstellar war in 300 years, and why Earth was the last place anyone thought to look. Second, what Marcus actually did when he found 2 strange aliens on his couch, and why his reaction was so genuinely confusing to every alien species involved. And third, what happened when the fleet arrived, because that scene alone, I promise you, it's worth sticking around for. All right, let's go back to the beginning. The Veth are by most galactic standards terrifying, not in weapons pointed at you way, though they can absolutely do that, but in a quiet, ancient, we have been here for 40,000 years kind of way. They have compound eyes that can see across electromagnetic spectrums humans can't even name. They communicate in a layered language that carries 16 simultaneous emotional tones in a single syllable, and their society runs on a strict hierarchical structure, where the line isn't just a tradition, it's a living legal institution. The 2 princesses, Siveth Yura and Siveth Len, sisters aged 14 and 16 in Veth years, which roughly translates to 19 and 22 in human years, were on a diplomatic transit voyage. Routine, fully escorted, 6 warships, 40 armed guards, 3 dedicated attendants per princess. They were supposed to be traveling from the Veth home world to the galactic conclave at Mira Station for a ceremonial signing of the 13th Accord. A formality, the kind of political event that sounds important and mostly involves standing still for photographs with elderly ambassadors. They never arrived. The convoy checked in at the standard waypoint just past the Bellin corridor, and then nothing. The ships arrived at Mira Station without the princesses. No explosion, no signs of a fight, no ransom demand, no bodies, just gone. And here's the thing that made it so much worse: the Veth don't lose things. They have a cultural concept called Vethral, roughly translating to the unbroken chain, which means that the tracking, documentation, and physical accountability of every member of the royal line is maintained at every moment, continuously, without exception, for their entire lives. The Veth had not lost a royal recorded history, not once, not a kidnapping, not an accident, not even an unauthorized 5-minute walk to a different room without a chaperone logging it until now. So you'd think that would mean the search was efficient, right? Organized, that a civilization 40,000 years old would have protocols for this. Oh, they had protocols. They had 47 protocols. They triggered all of them simultaneously, and that is exactly where everything started to fall apart. Within 12 hours of the disappearance, every major government The Galactic Conclave had received a notification. Within 24 hours, 3 fleets from 3 different empires had begun independent search operations, all in the same sector, none of them talking to each other. Within 48 hours, 2 of those fleets had nearly opened fire on each other over search jurisdiction. The Veth accused the Karathi of deliberately obstructing the search. The Karathi accused the Veth of violating neutral space protocols. Marisians, who technically owned the station the ceremony was supposed to happen at, accused everyone of making a diplomatic incident worse by showing up with weapons in their territory, and somewhere in the middle of all of this, a small, quiet request got buried in 600 diplomatic communiques and never actually actioned. A request to check the civilian cargo station waypoint Delta 7. Population 340 humans, mostly contractors and logistics workers. Rated low strategic value. Sitting at the exact point in the Belen corridor where the princesses had last been. Confirmed present, nobody checked it. Because why would they? The princesses were Veth royals. What would they be doing on a human cargo station? Sergeant Marcus Webb was 41 years old, 12 years out of the Earth Colonial Defense Corps, and currently employed as a maintenance supervisor on Waypoint Delta 7. His job was to fix things, specifically the kind of things that big, important civilizations built and then forgot to maintain: air recyclers, docking clamps, the water filtration system on Level 3 that had been making a noise like a dying animal for 6 months because nobody in procurement would sign off on the replacement part. He was not a diplomat. He was not a soldier anymore. He was a man with a wrench, a thermos of terrible coffee, and a 12-hour shift that started at 400 station time. He found them at 6:12. He was cutting through the secondary corridor on Deck 7, a quieter route he used when he didn't want to get stopped by the overnight logistics team with more maintenance complaints, and he almost stepped on them. 2 small figures huddled together at the base of his door. Now Marcus had been around. He'd done 2 tours in contested alien space during the expansion period. He'd served on joint species bases for 8 years. He could identify the physical characteristics of about 30 alien species on site, which wasn't impressive by military intelligence standards, but was extremely good for a man whose formal education had stopped at trade school. He recognized the Veth immediately: the iridescent chitin, the folded secondary arm structures, the slightly luminescent eye membranes. He knew what they were. He also, because he read the news and the station had been buzzing with emergency broadcast for 6 days, had a reasonable suspicion of who they were. Now here is the question that every alien diplomat, fleet commander, and interstellar legal expert spent the next week arguing about. What do you do? If you're the Veth, the answer is obvious. You alert every authority. Immediately, you initiate the royal protocol. You do not touch, approach, or speak to the fine princesses without authorization. You maintain a 20 m security perimeter and await the high guard. If you're the Karathi, you'd probably have them in an armored transport on the way to the nearest Veth authority before they even woke up. If you're the Marisians, you'd file a 17-page discovery report and schedule a formal handover ceremony for a date. 6 weeks later, Marcus Webb looked at two teenagers because that's what they were, whatever their species, who were clearly exhausted, clearly had been through something and were asleep on the cold floor of a space station corridor. And he thought, that looks uncomfortable. So he opened his door, he got a blanket, he very carefully, without waking them, arranged them slightly more comfortably against the wall. He thought about it for a second, then he just kind of picked them up one at a time gently and carried them inside and put them on the couch. He covered them with the blanket. He made himself a cup of cocoa. He sat in the chair across the room and kept watch, and then, because he'd been awake for 19 hours and it was the middle of the night, he fell asleep too. They woke up before he did, which in retrospect was probably for the best. Siveth Len, the older one, came to consciousness first and spent approximately 12 minutes doing a silent, motionless threat assessment of the room, the human in the chair, the blanket, the small ceramic mug, the bookshelves, the framed photograph on the wall, the absolutely non-threatening nature of basically everything in the room. She woke her sister. They communicated in the way Veth siblings do, through micro-vibrations too faint for human ears, for about 4 minutes. Then Siveth Yura reached out and very carefully picked up the paperback book that had fallen out of Marcus's hand when he fell asleep, looked at the cover and showed it to her sister. It was a science fiction novel. The cover had a rocket ship and 2 moons. The Veth have a gesture that roughly translates to a combination of this is bewildering, and I find this charming. Siveth Yura made that gesture when Marcus woke up at 8:40, 40 minutes late. For his shift, he found both of them sitting upright on the couch, blankets still across their laps, watching him with the large, luminous, multifaceted eyes that Veth use when they're paying very close attention. He said, and this is documented because his station comm was on a routine background log. He said, "Oh, morning, you sleep okay?" The Veth language has no casual greeting structure for this type of situation, because this type of situation, prior to this moment, had never existed. Siveth Len processed this for a moment and then said in passable conclave standard, "We slept." "Yes," Marcus nodded. "You hungry?" Another pause. "Veth food protocols are complex," Len said carefully. "We do not know what you have." Marcus looked in his kitchen. He had eggs, actual chicken eggs, a luxury. Import some preserved fruit packs, and about 3 different varieties of instant noodles. He held them up one at a time. They chose the fruit. He gave them 2 packs each and put a pot of water on for noodles. Now you might be thinking, "Marcus, you know who these are, right? You know the entire galaxy is looking for them." He did know. He absolutely knew. But here's the thing about Marcus Webb that every fleet admiral and diplomatic council missed in their threat assessments. And GT clears throat. And GT, he had a daughter. She was 23, back on Earth studying architecture. He hadn't seen her in 8 months, and when he looked at these 2 sitting on his second-hand couch eating fruit packs, one of them still holding his paperback, something in him just kind of clicked off. The war readiness, the threat calculus, the what are the correct procedures. Here they were kids, they were safe. They were eating breakfast. Everything else could wait until after breakfast. He didn't report them. Immediately, he sat down with his noodles and his 3rd coffee of the morning, and he asked them in the way a Dad asks a teenager, which is to say, casually and without pressure, how they'd ended up at his door. And they told him, it turned out the disappearance wasn't a kidnapping, it wasn't a conspiracy, it wasn't an assassination attempt or a political maneuver or any of the 17 competing theories currently being screamed about in 3 different fleets. It was a panic attack. Siveth Ura, the younger one, 16 in Veth years, the one who'd picked up his book, had developed what Veth physicians call convergent stress, a condition where the accumulated weight of formal duties, constant surveillance, and the recursive pressure of being both a person and an institution at the same time becomes neurologically overwhelming. She'd had an episode during the transit, a bad one. She'd needed to get off the ship just for an hour, just to breathe somewhere quiet. Her sister had gone with her because of course she had. Because that's what sisters do. They'd slipped through an emergency maintenance hatch. Neither of them entirely knew how. They'd found it, stumbled onto a docking arm, walked through an automated cargo seal, and suddenly found themselves on a human waypoint station with no communicators, no guards, no attendants, and absolutely no idea how to explain what had just happened. So they'd found a quiet corridor they'd sat down in. 6 days of accumulated exhaustion had done what 6 days of accumulated exhaustion does. They'd slept. Marcus listened to all of this without interrupting. He had a way of doing that, sitting quietly, noodles going cold in the bowl, just letting people talk, that apparently translated across species pretty well, because both princesses went from careful one-sentence answers to a full explanation over the course of about 40 minutes. His response when they finished was to ask if they wanted more fruit. Siveth men stared at him. In Veth social grammar, an elder speaking to a royal should be responding to this kind of disclosure with formal sympathy, offers of assistance, and at least 3 different kinds of ceremonial acknowledgement. She said in standard, "You are not going to say something formal?" Marcus thought about it. "I mean, I'm sorry you've been having a rough time." "That's rough, the pressure thing. I get it. I had anxiety attacks my first 2 years in the Corps. They're not fun." Another pause. "You had this condition?" "Something similar, yeah. Lots of people do." He shrugged. "You figure out what helps. Give yourself some grace about it. It's not a character flaw." Siveth Ura had been very quiet during this exchange. She was the one with the condition. She'd been waiting, Marcus realized, for some kind of judgment, for the adult in the room to be disappointed or worried, or to immediately start planning how to manage the optics of it. She said in halting standard, "The court, the ceremony, if we do not attend, that's a tomorrow problem." Marcus said, "Right now the only thing that matters is that you're okay. Now here's where it gets complicated, because Marcus Webb, maintenance supervisor, former sergeant, person who had 0 diplomatic authority whatsoever, had just created a situation that every legal expert in the Galactic Conclave would spend 6 months arguing about. Afterward, in the 13 hours between finding the princesses and finally contacting station authority, he had given them food, given them shelter, and had a conversation with them without filing a discovery report, without initiating a species contact protocol, without contacting the Veth Embassy, the Galactic Conclave, the Colonial Defense Corps Liaison Office, or any of the 7 other organizations that Technically should have been his first call. He'd also let them use his shower, Veth. Hygiene requirements were something he'd had to rig a makeshift solution for, but he managed, lent Siveth Yura his paperback to keep because she couldn't put it down, and shown them both how to make instant noodles. When his shift supervisor finally calmed him at 1300 to ask where he was, Marcus said very calmly, "I've got a situation in my quarters. I'm going to need the station commander, and probably someone from Seed, Earth, Colonial Affairs," and I think he paused. "I think you should call the Veth, tell them the princesses are fine, and they're having lunch." There a very long silence on the comm web. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, I just let them sleep." Veth fleet arrived at waypoint Delta 7 in approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes. 23 warships, 3 escort cruisers, the personal command vessel of High Admiral Vethkara, the same HFT Insector Admiral from the beginning of this story, who had not slept in 6 days and was by all accounts experiencing a level of contained fury that her second-in-command described in the official as geologically significant. They did not request docking permission. They did not need to. 23 warships against a civilian cargo station with a single defensive laser turret currently offline pending a part that procurement still hadn't signed off on wasn't really a negotiation. Marcus was informed by a very pale station commander that the High Admiral had requested, and the word requested was being used generously, his immediate presence at the main docking bay, along with both princesses. Marcus put on his best jacket he'd ironed it the week before for a station birthday celebration, so it was at least presentable. He looked at the princesses. Siveth Len had been getting progressively more formal postured over the last 2 hours, pulling herself back into the composed, careful bearing of a royal. Siveth Yura still had his paperback tucked under her secondary arm. "You're going to be okay," Marcus told them. "Whatever she says in there, you didn't do anything wrong," Lena said quietly. "You understand there may be diplomatic consequences for the station." "Yeah, probably." He didn't sound that worried about it. "That's not your fault either." The High Admiral came through the docking bay doors like a thunderstorm, wearing a uniform and GT. She was flanked by 12 High Guard soldiers, all in full armor, all armed. She stopped 6 FT from Marcus and stared down at him with 6 eyes that had not found rest in almost a week. The room was very quiet. The princesses had stepped forward slightly, a deliberate action putting themselves between the Admiral and Marcus, which was itself a thing that had apparently never happened before in the history of Veth royal security protocol. The Admiral looked at them. Her and GT voice when she spoke in Veth carried every emotional register at once. Relief, fury, exhaustion, love. Her second-in-command translated in a whisper, "They are unharmed, they are. Well, they are eating noodles." Siveth Yura was in fact still holding a half-empty instant noodle cup. The Admiral turned back to Marcus. She studied him with the kind of attention usually reserved for things that need to be categorized as threats. She looked at his jacket, the ironed one, slightly too big for him, with a small stain near the left pocket he'd missed. She looked at his face, which was tired and calm and completely unintimidated in the way that people who have genuinely Stopped caring about rank sometimes are. She said something in Veth. The translator hesitated, then rendered it. As you are the one who found them. Yes, Admiral, you kept them here for 13 hours without notification. I notified. As soon as I was sure they were comfortable and rested. You let them sleep. They were tired. Another silence. Somewhere in the ranks of the high guard, someone made a very small sound. That might in another context have been a laugh. The Admiral said, "You are not afraid of me." Marcus considered this. "I'm appropriately respectful, Admiral. But no," clears throat, "you're not who I was worried about." Then who were you worried about? He glanced at Siveth. Yura still holding the noodle cup, eyes wide, watching this exchange like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Her making sure she was okay before everything got loud. The High Admiral was still for a very long moment, and then she did something that no living member of the Veth High Guard had ever witnessed their admiral do in a professional context. She bowed. It was small, barely a degree of inclination, but it was unmistakable. Gesture of acknowledgement that in Veth culture carries a weight somewhere between "thank you" and "I see what you did, and I will not forget it." Marcus bowed back because that just seemed like the right thing to do. The diplomatic fallout lasted about 4 months. Marcus Webb was technically cited for 17 protocol violations, all of which were quietly dropped when the Veth Imperial Court submitted a formal request for his commendation instead. The 13th Accord was signed 3 weeks late. Savith Yura attended. She walked into the ceremony with her sister, head up. Composed, royal. She still had the paperback. The maintenance part that procurement wouldn't approve for the Level 3 water filtration system was delivered to Waypoint Delta 6 weeks later, along with a crate of Veth preserved fruit and a note that contained exactly 4 words in conclave. Standard. For the quiet human, Waypoint Delta 7 got a formal designation upgrade 6 months after that. Population increased to 800, new docking facilities, better air recyclers, the defensive laser turret finally got its maintenance budget approved. Nobody ever officially explained why a civilian cargo waypoint suddenly became a strategic priority. But the station commander had a theory. And Marcus Webb, who got 3 citations, he didn't ask for a visit from a Veth Imperial diplomat who spent 45 minutes asking him about human concepts of grace and exactly 1 phone call from his daughter back on Earth who'd seen the news and said, "Dad, what did you do?" Marcus Webb just kept doing his job, fixing things, keeping watch, making sure people were okay before everything got loud, which, when you think about it, is exactly what the galaxy needed. And somehow, as it so often does, humanity delivered. If you like this one, you're going to want to watch the one where a human janitor accidentally became the most dangerous legal precedent in galactic history just by doing his job correctly. It's linked right up here.